Good evening, class, and welcome to our third discussion. For this week's discussion, we'll be utilizing the book Religions of the World, 13th edition, um, right here. And we're going to be looking at the religion of Christianity, and we're going to be looking at the particular section called the Monastic Movement, and that'll be on page 217. In a moment, I will read it. But before I read it, I wanted to list some vocabulary, and then I also wanted to list some relevant questions for discussion. I'll list the main question for discussion, and then I'll list some follow-up questions. So before we read it, some vocabulary to be aware of. The first is medieval church, Western world, native Egyptian religions, monasticism, Manichaeans, Gnostics, Neoplatonists, asceticism, Simeon Stylites, Pachomius, Christendom, Benedict of Nursia, Jerome, Latin Vulgate. And so our main question is, what are the ascetic practices of monastic life in the context of the medieval Christian era, and what are individuals engaging in these practices attempting to accomplish? So let me go ahead and I will read the passage, which is just 3 paragraphs on page 217, and there's a little bit on 218 too. And then afterwards I will ask the 3 follow-up questions and restate the main question for discussion. So here we go. The monastic movement. Introduced by the early medieval church, the monastic movement became a major part of Christianity. Of all the major religions of the Western world, Christianity is the only one to encourage monastic orders. Neither Judaism nor Islam have encouraged its members to live alone apart from the evils of normal life, although there have been minor movements in both religions in that direction. Next paragraph. The movement towards asceticism and monastic community life apparently began in Egypt in the middle of the 3rd century CE. Christians in Egypt may have been influenced by the asceticism of native Egyptian religions, or they may have been influenced by the basic distrust of the flesh taught by the Manichaeans, the Gnostics, and the Neoplatonists. Egypt itself, with its desert and wild places, offered the ideal setting for men and women who wanted to leave the problems of normal life behind them and seek solitude in the wilderness. Some began to sell their possessions and go out into the desert regions to live simple lives dedicated to God. A number of them were widely known for their feats of asceticism. Simeon Stylites, for example, is said to have lived on top of a pillar in the desert of Syria for 36 years. Others fasted for long periods, went without sleep, ate only the simplest of food, gave up bathing, and wore garments that were irritating to the skin. Still others gathered together and formed monastic communities. The first Christian monastery is attributed to Pachomius, who was born in Egypt in the last decade of the 3rd century. For a variety of reasons, the monastic movement soon became popular throughout Christendom. Benedict of Nursia is another important figure in the history of Christian monasticism, and is especially remembered for his, quote, rule, a disciplinary guidebook that provided order for communities of monks and nuns. Basically, monasteries were secluded places where people dedicated themselves to a simple life of hard manual labor, prayer, fasting, and sometimes study. What little learning and scholarship existed in the medieval period was kept alive in monasteries. Historically, some of the best minds of the church were produced in these communities. Jerome, who translated the Hebrew and Greek biblical material into the Latin Vulgate. The standard Bible for the Roman Catholic Church was over 1500 years, was a product of the monastic movement. Some have suggested that the vitality and strength of the monasteries at any given time was an accurate gauge of the vitality of the entire church. And that's where the passage ends. So I have three questions that will lead up to our final question, which I asked at the beginning of this video. The first one is, what are the evils of normal life? In one passage, they say the evils of normal life or the problems of normal life. So what are the evils/problems of normal life? Question 2. What is the distrust of the flesh? And question 3. What, if any, relationship is there between study and asceticism in monastic communal life during this period? And so our final question for discussion and reflection: what are the ascetics' practices of monastic life? So what are they? What are the ascetic practices of monastic life? And they list quite a few. And what are the individuals engaging in them attempting to accomplish? And don't just say things like they want to escape the evils and the problems of normal life. What is that? So you want to answer that question first. And be sure to look at the other two. What is the distrust of the flesh? What would that have to do with the practices? And what is this relationship, if any, between the asceticism, all these different feats you heard about, and study? So I hope this helps to promote quite an interesting discussion, and I look forward to reading your discussion post on Canvas throughout this week. Take care and have a good evening.